All right, hello everybody. I'm Shannon Shy. This is the Rise Beyond OCD Answers, Insight, and Inspiration to Move Forward series. I created this series so that I could get who I consider to be the icons of the OCD recovery community on board. So this will be sort of this ongoing and lasting resource for people to go to my YouTube channel or wherever these interviews pop up, like any of the interviewees, they put it on their social media stuff. People will be able to see these awesome, very wonderful, devoted, dedicated, smart people about OCD speak. And I was just telling our guest, John, that I consider this is my dream team. For my all of my involvement with the International OCD Foundation when I was on their board and since I was the keynote speaker in 2010, I've met these people. I see them every year at the International OCD Foundation conference, sometimes in other venues. They're all very gracious, and that's why I chose this select group of people, and I'm just very honored that they decided to join us. So before I introduce our guest, I have a few admin remarks. Um, Whether you're living with OCD, supporting someone you love, or working in the mental health field, this is a caring space where you can learn, connect, and we can all find hope together. Just a quick reminder, what we share today is meant for education and support. It is not a substitute for professional care. And if you ever find yourself in crisis, please reach out. You can call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline or 911 if there is an immediate danger or crisis. For international support, and we have a lot of international members who watch these, you can visit findahelpline.com. Remember, you are not alone. Healing and recovery are achievable, and we are here to move forward together. Today's interview is being live streamed. The interview, like all the other interviews in this series, it is being recorded for later viewing on my YouTube channel or on my website, www.ocdrecoveryturningpoints.com. Everyone will be muted. The audience, it is your choice whether you want to have your video on or off. Mine and our guest John's will be on, of course. The chat room is open. I ask everyone to be respectful of others and maintain decorum. We've never had an issue with this. I don't expect we will have it today. We will have a question and answer period at the end. And then before my final question, well, the Q&A will come before my final question. If you have a question, please put it in the chat room, or if you just feel like you have to say it yourself, hit the waving the hand thing, and I'll try to find you. Uh, I've lived my life imperfectly, so I don't expect this to ever be perfect. So if I mess up, we will just roll with the current. Okay. So let me, with that, introduce our guest today. And if you're in the OCD recovery community and you haven't heard of our guest, you're like in the OCD recovery on another planet, right? Everybody knows our guest today. He's one of the most prolific authors on OCD, one of the best known therapists in the world on OCD. And he has an amazing story going from his own personal recovery struggle to being one of the top-notch therapists in the world on this. John Hershfield, marriage and family therapist, licensed in uh, clinical marriage and family therapist, is the director of the Center for OCD and Anxiety at Sheppard Pratt in Towson, Maryland, where he specializes in the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder and related disorders in both outpatient and residential settings. He is the author of When a Family Member Has OCD, Overcoming Harm OCD, and the OCD Workbook for Teens, and co-author of Everyday Mindfulness for OCD, the Mindfulness Workbook for OCD, and the Unwanted Thoughts and Intense Emotions Workbook. You might wonder, and we could even ask him, where does he find the time? His forthcoming book is entitled Being a Parent with OCD. John, I will tell you right now that I talk to a lot of parents, and they are always scratching their heads. So this will be enlightening for a lot of people. John is a member of the Scientific and Clinical Advisory Board of the International OCD Foundation, IOCDF, and the faculty member of their Behavioral Therapy Training Institute, BTTI. He is internationally recognized as a thought leader in the treatment of OCD and anxiety, in particular on the role of mindfulness and self-compassion in exposure-based therapy. He frequently presents at professional conferences and has been featured multiple times on CNN and other media outlets to offer his input on mental health issues. From a personal standpoint, I've known John for a long time. And I think I've seen you at conferences, but I think the first time we actually met was in relation to the Mid-Atlantic OCD group. And when we were trying to get that all started, and you were one of that. It was Charlie Mansfield and me and a guy named Carter Waddell who were trying to get everything in. And then we had this influx of all these bright young superstars that came in and said, "Hey, all you old people, move out of the way. We got it." And you guys took over. And then, John, since then, you've been writing and lecturing and seeing patients. And I love the thought leader part of your bio, because that's true. You're right. You're one of the thought leaders in this, and you keep moving the ball forward. And I just say, from my personal interactions with you, you are one of the most down to earth people. You are friendly to everybody. It's easy to walk up to you at a conference. And, when you have superstar status, sometimes that can be difficult because people are flocking to you, but you are gracious with everyone. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, to be as part of the series. Like I said, this is my dream team, and I'm really, really happy and honored you're here. So welcome, John Hershfield.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really touched by your introduction and also just yeah, really happy to be a part of this. You also do a lot for the OCD community, and it always feels good to be affiliated with people who are reducing suffering in the world.
Thank you. All right, well, let's jump into it. Uh, Many people who are watching know you as a respected therapist, author, and program director, but you also have lived experience with OCD. For our viewers who may be meeting you for the first time, how has your personal journey shaped the work you do today?
Yeah, people often ask me if I have OCD. It's written in my books. It's something I'm not shy about. I often make the joke when they say, "Do you have OCD?" I say, "I'm not sure. I'm holding out for an 11th opinion." uh, um, I came into this field. I think I was pulled into this field in a sense when my OCD was really at its worst in my late 20s. I was very resistant to going back into treatment. I had treatment off and on throughout my teens and young adulthood, and just sort of thought of myself as, I guess, smarter than it all. I just couldn't take it seriously. I couldn't see how it applied to me. I couldn't see how I deserved to feel better. I thought of myself essentially as cursed. And then treatment started to actually work. It started to make a difference. Maybe it was a maturity thing. Maybe I arrived at a place where I could take it in, or maybe I was just so sick I had to accept that everything I'd tried couldn't be the right way to do it, and I had to try something different. Right? So you go to a therapist and they say, "Well, have you tried this and have you tried that? And nothing works, nothing works." And then they say something ridiculous like, "Well, have you tried agreeing with your thoughts?" Like, who are you? Why would I do that? Have you tried exposure therapy? Yeah, I don't know about that. So I started trying this new, way of looking at OCD as a competitor for my attention, as something I could actually engage with and stand up to and relate to as an other, as opposed to identify with, like, I'm just this way. Well, no, I'm actually not this way. There's something in my head that's telling me to be this way, but maybe I have a chance to be something else. One of the things that was really helpful, and it kind of taps into a lot of the work that you do, was peer support. I went online, I don't know, I think it was 2005, so over 20 years ago, and found a Yahoo discussion board that at the time was run by Dr. James Claiborne and Mike Janicki and the lovely Wendy Muller. And saw all these people posting their OCD stories. And they were all different from mine because they were unique to the individual, but they're also all kind of the same, right? Like I noticed everything I was complaining about and everything I was asking about was kind of the same thing, just in different words. And I started interacting with these strangers online, saying like, well, here's what my therapist would say I should do, or here's what I think would make sense in the context of the work I'm doing. And people started responding to it, like started treating me like I was a ghost therapist or something like that. And yeah, it occurred to me after some time, like I was really getting a lot out of it. One, it was helping me understand my own treatment journey because I was having to explain it to others. This is one of the things I do in treatment. When I'm doing exposure therapy with somebody, I won't let them do the ERP unless they can explain to me why they think it's going to work, why they think it's going to be helpful. Right? If they can't explain it back to me, then they're just following my directions, and that's not how you learn, right? So, um, in doing that through my own journey, yeah, I really discovered that I get a lot out of helping others, and helping others in that specific way. So I made a shift then into, uh, I got my master's in clinical psychology. I started grad school when I was 30. And then after that, spent some time in an internship. And then, as soon as I could, found a gig working for an OCD center. And then the rest is history. I started writing and I started, kind of letting my career evolve to what it is now, which is directing this center for Shepherd Pratt, not far from my hometown out here in Northern Maryland.
Was there a particular or important turning point in your recovery, like a moment of clarity, courage, hope? What memory stands out for you that you're like, oh, I get it, right?
Yeah,
I'm moving.
I I think there were a lot, but the one that I think of first when I'm asked that question, and I can picture this pretty clearly. One of the hardest things to let go of when you're in the hole with OCD is reassurance seeking. And I had established a really toxic pattern of reassurance seeking uh, with my wife. She was my girlfriend at the time. We've been together over 20 years. Um, and I remember thinking, oh, wait a minute. Like I had this thought of like, I could just ask this question and that would spare me the rest of my life wondering the answer. Right. And it seemed totally reasonable and totally rational. It didn't feel like OCD. It felt like I beat it, like I cracked the code. If I could just ask this one more question, then this would all be done. And I would be sparing myself a lifetime of suffering, thinking, oh, I can't ask that question because of OCD therapy, but if I had the answer, it would be good. And then this other thought popped up that said, John, maybe you're wrong. And I was like, oh, I never heard of that before. And so I decided in that moment to take the risk of listening to that other thought and say, even though it feels like the right thing to do to ask this reassurance seeking question, you know, I had already made a contract with my partner. I wasn't going to do that. I'd already told my therapist I wasn't going to do that. I'd already explained to my parents I wasn't going to do that. Still felt like I could totally do it and get away with it and it would make a difference. And I said, what if I'm wrong? I'm just going to pretend that I'm wrong, that even though it feels like the right thing to do, it's not. And so I just didn't ask that question. And honestly, Shannon, I couldn't tell you what the question is. I have no idea. I don't remember, but I remember it being a real gem. And I just remember keeping my mouth shut and thinking, let's see what happens next. And the initial wave of discomfort and anxiety around the uncertainty and the doubt and all that stuff, was clearly there. And I just remember kind of watching it dissipate over the next few days. And then I remember every single prompt to compulsively seek reassurance after that seemed weaker and weaker and weaker. It just seemed less and less credible and less worth it. So I think of that as a big turning point for me. This sort of aha moment that just because it feels like the right thing to do, if everybody around you who cares about you has informed you that this is OCD and the only one saying maybe it isn't is you, take the risk of treating it like OCD and then just weigh the results and see what happens. And in my case, I weighed the results and it was clear that I was starting to win battles in the war.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I tell people all the time, there's an explanation as to why you are having these thoughts, why you feel the way you do. Like look around the room and all the people around you. There's a reason why this is happening to you. Uh, all right. You lead both outpatient care and residential OCD, the OCD program at Shepherd Pratt. For anybody watching who may be wondering whether they need more support, how do you help people understand that stepping into higher level care can be an act of strength?
So there are a lot of reasons why a person would benefit from a higher level of care, and it's not always directly correlated to the severity of the condition. I met lots of people with extremely severe OCD who just blossom beautifully in regular outpatient treatment. So it's not just the severity, although the severity can often be a factor. It really has to do with um, whether or not, and we're going to leave access aside in this discussion because a lot of times people need higher levels of care, but they just can't afford it, or they don't have the
Right.
insurance that will do it, or they can't leave their work, or there's a lot of reasons why people don't access higher level of care. But if we're going to make an assumption that a person could access higher level of care, why would they do it? Well, one reason would be if they know they've tried all of the evidence-based treatments, but they're just not making progress, right? And what starts to happen there is the assumption of like I'm bad or I'm untreatable or something is wrong with me. When the reality is usually there's an undiagnosed or underdiagnosed or untreated or undertreated co-occurring condition that is keeping this person from integrating the tools. Treatment of OCD itself is not complicated, but it can be complicated by major depressive disorder or personality disorder or undiagnosed trauma-based disorder or something like that. And a lot of times I find that people don't even know that that's what's happening. They just think of themselves as not being smart enough or strong enough to fight their OCD, when in fact, they're not just fighting their OCD. They're fighting their OCD and two or three other things, but they don't even see those other attackers coming because they think of it all as being OCD. So that's one reason a person might seek a higher level of care, is to get a more comprehensive clarity of their diagnoses, which is very hard to do when you're just seeing a therapist. Having multiple eyes on you in a setting where you're not only having these sort of evaluations and doing these tests and things like that, but you're also interacting with nursing staff and interacting with your peers and being kind of observed by people who care about you, who are formulating a theory of mind for you as to why you're having this trouble. That can be super helpful. So sometimes it's just you're doing everything right, but you 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 have other things going on that aren't being treated. And if you only treat the OCD, those other things sometimes get worse. And if you only treat those other things, in the hopes that like, okay, I'll treat this other thing and then I'll come back and treat the OCD. We know what the OCD does. Like it goes on the attack. Oh, he's not paying attention. He's over there focusing on his trauma. Let's get him with the OCD. Um, so one of the advantages of working in the residential program where I work at Shepherd Pratt is we take this holistic approach. We're always treating the whole person. Even though I work in the OCD side of things, I'm always looking at the bigger picture with this person because I know any part of the system that I go after, the other part of the system is going to adjust. Um, so why does it take a lot of courage to do it? Well, first of all, you have to be willing to um, put your story in the hands of more than one therapist or one psychiatrist, right? So that can feel very risky, especially if you have issues with trust because you've been let down before. Um, you have to be willing to separate yourself from your work or your family to go and live somewhere and live in some strange place, and that takes a tremendous amount of courage. And again, it's by design because the other factor that sometimes plays a significant role in needing a higher level of care is that your current environment is not conducive to better mental health. So we need to get you out of that environment. We need to get you away from your job and away from your home life and away from your regular day-to-day errands at the grocery store and stuff like that, just to regroup and figure out, okay, what are we doing here? And then gradually reintroduce you back into that environment. But that's very scary to let go of all those things. People have all these ideas in their heads of, people taking advantage of them or getting lost in the system or becoming a quote unquote professional psychiatric patient where all you ever do is sort of live a life of characterized by mental illness. So even in regular outpatient therapy, your biggest exposure is your first exposure. When you go to someone, you say, here's what I'm really thinking, and here's how I've been responding to it, right? Here's my story. That's a huge exposure to trust someone at that level. And, to do so at a higher level of care means doing it with a lot more people. So weak people never make it into our program. They wouldn't know how to ask for that kind of help. Always impressed by anybody who's willing to do it.
Yeah, and I think it really talks about hope. somebody like most people, as you were saying, do great with outpatient care, right? They go through what their treatment with their own provider, and they do great. But there is a group, I don't know how big it is, but people who find it recovery very difficult, right? Either because they've convinced themselves that they can't do it, or some other reason, and then they start to give up hope. I'm like, oh my god, and I'm like, no, you haven't exhausted like the universe of recovery options here. So if this is not working, right? There's other thing that's out there. Let's just keep looking north here and
Yeah.
keep going. So anyway, that's helpful because I get a lot of questions from people about higher level of care, and that was very helpful. Let's shift now to the topic of shame and fear. Very common with folks who suffer from OCD. And many people watching this struggle with shame about their thoughts. When someone says, if people knew what goes on in my head, they'd think I'm a bad person or something like that.
Yeah.
How do you begin helping them move toward compassion instead of judgment, self judgment like that?
It's a great question because I think that that is actually the treatment for OCD. That's at the core of all of it, right? We talk about ERP being the gold standard, but ERP is only a function of your willingness to address your shame and take the risk of not identifying with your thoughts and letting go of judgment of your thoughts and then deciding that you're going to do something to change your behavior in response to those thoughts. And so if you are starting from the position of I shouldn't have these thoughts because something is wrong with me because I'm bad, you can do all the exposure therapy in the world and white knuckle your way through it and then wonder why you haven't gotten any better, because the fundamental shift has to be identifying yourself as something other than your thoughts. And so it really has to start with self-compassion. A lot of people think they're going to get to self-compassion later, right? This is true of a lot of things that we want to change, right? Look at like physical fitness, for example. People think that they can work out harder and then learn to love their bodies, but that's not how it works. You learn to love your body and then you decide to practice healthy habits. Um, and this is something that comes up in mindfulness circles a lot as well, that people meditate to learn how to be more self-compassionate, when in fact, learning how to be more self-compassionate might lead you towards living a more meditative lifestyle. So what do we do about shame and judgment? When I think about self-compassion, just as a general concept, I try to think about it in more utilitarian terms. People with OCD are famously averse to like, I don't know about all this squishy, treat yourself like a friend stuff, and maybe I don't deserve it. So, okay, I try to think just more like objectively, what are we doing when we're engaged in self-criticism? When we're saying I'm bad, and when we're criticizing ourselves for having a thought, obviously there's that first fatal flaw, which is this assumption that you're the author of your thoughts and the creator of your thoughts, and that you're sort of willing them to fruition. So this is just a fundamental shift in how you look at reality. Either we are writing these thoughts, like I'm sitting around and going, you know what, for my next thought, it's going to be a cat on the head of a giraffe, right? Either we're like making that happen, or it's happening and we're noticing that it's happening, and then we're deciding how we want to respond to it. Is this thought useful? Do I want to play with it? Do I dislike it, like it, right? So we're responding to it in the way that you might, instead of thinking of yourself as making the stew, you're the one watching the little ingredients bubble to the top of the stew as you look down on it. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is the self-criticism is basically saying, I should have known better. I should have known better than to have this thought. I should have known better than to find myself in this situation where these thoughts would arise. And that is a fundamentally like flawed piece of logic, because it's actually not possible to have known better. Everything we do immediately after having the thought, this would be a good idea. We're just not always right. So I think like, oh, I'm going to have that extra slice of pizza and then my stomach hurts. And, I should have known better. Yeah, but like right before you ate that extra slice of pizza, you were like, I'm hungry. I want the extra slice of pizza, right? Like if you had the thought, I don't want it, then you wouldn't have eaten it, right? And you would have followed that thought through. So what are you judging? Right? You're judging a process that really doesn't have a whole lot to do with you. It would be like me. I'm in Northern Maryland right now. We just had a little snowstorm. It's really pretty out there. It would be like me judging, myself for it snowing. Right? But I'm not really in charge of that. I might not like it. It might make the roads icy or whatever, but it's not really up to me. The question is, how am I going to respond to it? So if self-criticism is mostly about I should have known better, trying to solve that problem, requires you to, be able to time travel. It just doesn't make any sense. So what is the problem to solve? This moment, as I'm dealing with this situation, the only question worth answering is what would be helpful now. And like if it's additionally helpful to think how would I talk to my best friend or my partner or somebody I love, uh, great, maybe that'll help you come up with a good idea. But the fundamental shift from self-criticism and judgment and shame to doing something about it is saying what would be helpful now. And nobody who's asking that question honestly is going to say, doing a bunch of compulsions, right? Or ruminating, or beating myself up, or fantasizing about what I could have done, even though what I did is already done and there's nothing I can do about it. What would be helpful now might be exposure therapy. It might be cutting yourself some slack. It might be taking a break, taking a walk. It could be any number of things, but it would be the same thing that you would recommend to any other person that you cared about at all. And that's what self-compassion is.
Yeah. And you mentioned the word mindfulness. You're a big mindfulness guy. It's very clear in your writings. In a simple human way, um, what does mindfulness mean to you personally, and how has it helped people in recovery that you've treated?
So mindfulness is commonly defined as paying attention to the present moment exactly the way it is, without judgment and without the intention of changing it. So it's really just saying, hey, look at that before everything. Hey, look at that, it's snowing. Hey, look at that, I'm having a thought. Hey, look at that, there's a sensation in my body. So a lot of times people talk about mindfulness as an intervention, like I used mindfulness. What they really mean is they used some emotion regulation skill, and that's fine, but that's not what it means to that's not what mindfulness means. Mindfulness is not an intervention. It's a perspective that you take. So either you're identified with your thoughts and you're completely at the mercy of whatever comes up, and that is you. So I am anxious, I am bad, I am disgusting. Or you're not identified with thoughts, images, urges, what we call obsessions. In fact, they are objects of attention. There's something you can notice and observe and look at without judgment as phenomena arising, and then decide in that moment what comes up for you. You notice that aversion comes up. I don't like it. Okay. Now the question is, what would you like to do with that aversion? What would be an adaptive or healthy thing to do in response to that aversion? Or you notice resistance. Or maybe you notice a thought that you do like. Maybe you don't like that you like that thought, right? So, okay, so noticing aversion to the sensation of liking. So it's always about stepping back and noticing what's coming up, and then in that freedom, allowing yourself to make a decision what to do next. It's very difficult to work your way out of a story when you're inside the story. It's not as difficult to work your way out of a story if you're reading a book and the story is in the book and you say, yeah, I think I'm done reading for the night, and you close the book and you put it away because you're not inside the story, even though it might still be bouncing around your head a little bit.
Yeah, that's really helpful because mindfulness comes up a lot. I mean, I actually wrote about it this morning in one of my daily affirmations in dealing with rumination. So I hear it a whole lot. And when I went through my own recovery, my doctors, this is back in 1997, they weren't using terms like exposure and response prevention. They weren't using terms like mindfulness, even if they probably existed. My people weren't. In fact, they called cognitive behavioral therapy at that
Right.
time, right? So, but I can tell people from what I understand about mindfulness, this is what mindfulness meant to me and how I used it to help myself, right? And
Yeah.
so I encourage everybody, whatever John has written about mindfulness, I just encourage everybody right now, go read it because it will be helpful to you. Go buy
I'll
it and read it, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing that often confuses people is they might say like, well, um, should I do mindfulness or should I do ERP? And the way I look at it is that ERP is exercising mindfulness. It is taking mindfulness and giving it a specific utility. So to say I am being mindful is to say as things arise, I'm observing them and I'm seeing them for what they are, and I'm holding back or at least noticing my tendency to judge them, and then I'm making decisions on how to respond to them. To say I'm doing ERP is to say I'm intentionally bringing things on so that I can practice mindfulness with them. Right? I'm intentionally touching the dirty thing or looking at the scary image or reading the scary script. And then I'm going to practice noticing what comes up for me. And then I'm engaging in response prevention, right? I'm instead of being identified with it and reacting compulsively, I'm going to be non-identified with it and respond adaptively. And that's all mindfulness. The main difference is just, are you dealing with it as it arises, or are you practicing? Are you intentionally creating circumstances where you can practice?
Okay, let's talk about stigma. What are some of the most harmful myths about OCD that you still hear, and what truth would you want to replace them with?
So I'm trying to think of ones that are specific to OCD because I think we have a lot of um, stigma about mental health in general. I do think to a large extent things are getting better, but we still have a long ways to go. Um, so I think the biggest myth is that OCD. The biggest myth really has to do with mental health in general, which is that it's this fundamentally different thing than other aspects of our health, right? You twist your ankle and you go to the doctor, but something's gone wrong with your brain, and you think you're supposed to walk it off, right? And that's just an error, a social error that's just persisted over a long period of time. So mental
Yeah.
health is health, I think, is the first thing. And then specific to OCD, you know, people say things like everybody's got a little OCD. And usually when people say this, they're not trying to be insensitive. They're not trying to cause harm. They're trying to actually say, I can relate to you. I also have these thoughts and I also do these things. The problem is that there's a D in it for a reason. Disorder means it's a psychiatric condition, right? And so, of course, everybody has unwanted intrusive thoughts. And of course, everybody has rituals for dealing with them. Um, the reason why we call it a disorder is when having unwanted thoughts and intrusive rituals is impairing your functioning. If it wasn't impairing your functioning, we would just call it being quirky, being silly. And, people are silly. They have silly problems. They have silly thoughts. Um, so I think one part of the stigma is that OCD is like this cute, endearing little thing. When in fact, the things that are cute and endearing are having little rituals or being a little bit squirrely around, uh, is this safe or not, or is this clean or not, or needing to do things in a certain order, or having a lucky shirt that's the right color or something like that. Those things are cute. Or maybe having a really good attention for detail and being really fastidious and ambitious. Those things could be very adaptive, very useful. And you might call them OCD, but none of those are actually parts of a disorder. They're just part of the human condition. It's when those things are so exaggerated that your efforts to feel okay are actually making you sick that we call it a psychiatric illness. And so, stigma wise, people are uncomfortable with illness. And so we try to make it humorous to ease our comfort. And I think that's not inherently a bad thing, but if it goes completely unchecked, it causes a lot of pain and suffering. And it keeps people from thinking that they're worthy of getting the help that they need.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit, going inside of treatment and hope. When someone arrives in treatment feeling convinced that their OCD is too severe or that they are beyond help, how do you help them reconnect with hope as they begin?
So, first of all, no one in the history of OCD has ever thought that their OCD was treatable or just like everybody else's, or really not a big deal. So the part of what keeps a person really stuck is thinking that their OCD is different, is resisting that letting go process of being like, you know what, man, at the end of the day, it's just OCD. It's like, no, this is special. This is different. And we do this sometimes because of shame, right? Because like, how could something that millions of people struggle with keep me from being able to get out of the house? Like, what's wrong with me? Like, millions of people struggle with it. I should be able to just get over it. Right. And so part of the condition, and this is very similar in this is a term used in substance use disorders, terminal uniqueness. This idea that like my addiction alone is different, or my reasons for drinking it are different from everybody else's. But I think that applies to OCD very well. That part of the OCD trickery
Yeah.
is to tell you that yours is different from somebody else's because the content's different, because you're different, because your family's different, because your genetics are different. Sure, but also OCD is OCD is OCD, and treating it like it's special is actually working to the OCD's advantage. Once you decide to stop treating it like it's special, that can feel very awkward and uncomfortable, but it can also be a major superpower against OCD. Um, and so when people think of themselves as too special or too sick to get well, of course they're going to lose hope because they're going to get depressed. So one thing that has become more clear to me in working with more complex cases in a residential environment is that when people get to that place of depression with their OCD, where they're feeling like they don't have hope, where they don't have the assumption of getting better, is that they start to cozy up to something that gets sometimes referred to as a sick identity. So you start to view yourself as a sick person. And that can be very dangerous because that means that efforts to get well come with a price that you might not actually, that you might be afraid of, right? If I get better, nobody will believe that I was ever that sick. So I have to stay sick because this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And if I do these exposures or I talk to my therapist or I take this medication and next week you see me out there, having a great life, you're going to think I was making it all up. And so I'm going to cling to this identity of sick person because at least I know I'm safe and people will take care of me in that situation. And they don't, it's not, nobody's doing it for fun. It's just, it's the way that the OCD and the depression collude to keep you from getting the treatment that you need. Don't change. Stay the same. If you change, people will stop taking an interest in you. People will stop caring about you. You're going to be out there with all your symptoms, and everybody's going to think you're faking it because you weren't sick enough to not get better, so you can't be that sick. And so you just get stuck in these loops. And I think that can be very dangerous. The other part of this is somebody says they're hopeless. I just have no hope. It's hard to hear this when you're feeling that, but the objective reality is that hopelessness is a symptom. It's a symptom of depression. It's not a human baseline. We're all born with certain levels of this and that, including hope. And when you look at your reserves of hope and you see that there is none, that's a symptom of depression. And if you look up, symptoms of depression, it's all there, emptiness, worthlessness, hopelessness. And you need to treat that clinically. Everybody has some hope, and if you can't see it, it's because it's buried under something. And then we just have to figure out what it's buried under and try to help you shovel that off. But hopelessness is not it's not a state of being. It's not a natural state. It's a symptom that can be treated as a symptom. Everybody should have some hope. There's always another lever to pull.
It's a great answer. I tell people all the time, the three most important things I can tell you, I'll tell you right now. The first one I say is that you suffer from a treatable disorder, right? It's a treatable disorder, right? And someone can show you how, the what, the how, all of that, but it's a treatable disorder. So let's find where that little spark of hope is in you, and let's draw it out. Something I wrote about this morning. What I wrote is not relevant here, but it's just on my mind, so to speak. For viewers who feel stuck in rumination or like mental rituals, what is one small, realistic first step that you encourage people to take during treatment?
Yeah, rumination is a subject that's a sore spot for a lot of people because although technically you could describe it as an action that someone is taking, like I'm choosing to spend my attention on figuring out this problem, most people don't feel like it's an action that they're taking. They feel like it's something that's being done to them by their, overactive OCD mind. So first is sort of making that shift. And again, it comes back to what we were talking about before. You can't do it while criticizing yourself because that's a huge distraction from the task at hand. So you have to start with the assumption that whatever's going on in your mind, it's not your fault. It's just your responsibility, right? It's not, you didn't cause it. You just have to do something about it. So you become aware that let's say it happens in the middle of this conversation you and I are having, Shannon, and my I'm kind of like nodding and smiling and you're talking and I'm hearing what you're saying, but my mind walks away. It stops listening and it starts to figure out some problem, and I want to ruminate on something that happened earlier today and I want to try to figure it out. I'm sneaking off to do a little extra OCD homework in the hopes you won't notice because I'm still nodding and smiling, right? And then I become aware that I'm doing it. And it's right there in that moment. Can I label that and abandon it and really do that impulsively as opposed to thoughtfully and intentionally? Kind of, oh, wandered off, begin again. Oh, wandered off, begin again. Now I can't take the extra time to be like, oh, I'm always ruminating. What's wrong with me? I should be thinking about this conversation I'm having, right? Because that's going to pull me further away from the conversation. I have to just notice that I wandered off, understand that wandering off is what minds do. They're curious little puppies. That's what they like to do. And drop it and begin again. Now, the best way I know to develop that skill is to develop a meditation practice because that's like 90% of what meditation is. You sit there, you watch something, usually the breath or an object or a sound or something like that. And at any point that you notice your mind has wandered off to do something else, you just start over, right? And you get used to that starting over process. So sometimes I use the language of label and abandon. Oh, ruminating, boop, abandon it, back to what I was doing. Acceptance and commitment therapy has this wonderful acronym ACE, which is sort of acknowledge and accept what you're doing, come back into the body and engage in what's in front of you. And it's a similar process, right? You just notice that you're ruminating. Okay. You identify that an action is happening, right? And it's a little bit different from other compulsions where you could say, oh, I really want to wash my hands, but I'm going to resist doing that, right? Because these compulsions can start automatically. Automatic, not the same thing as involuntary. It just means it happened. Okay, so the better you notice that it's happening and bring yourself back from it, the sooner you catch it. At some point you can get to a place where the wandering process becomes obvious to you and you go, oh, I'm about to wander off. Okay, let me get back to this conversation and have that effort into it. But usually when people say they can't stop ruminating on an OCD level, it's because there's so much self-criticism going on in the process that the agitation that they add to becoming aware that they're ruminating causes them to ruminate more. And the exception to this is when there's other conditions that might cause rumination to be just very difficult to let go of. One of them is major depressive disorder. Another one is bipolar disorder. And in some cases, substance use disorders can also just cause the mind to just like not be able to contain its rumination. Even in that, you can learn to observe that that's what the mind is doing and find some place of peace with, I can't do much about it right now other than to not add to it with criticism. But if we're strictly talking about OCD, the challenge is to catch it, drop it, and not get caught up in complaints about, oh, I had to do it so many times, because that doesn't matter. You just have to do it however many times you have to do it until your brain realizes, all right, I'm not going to pursue that pathway of thinking, even though I might feel this instinct to start it.
Okay. And before we shift, let me say I am nodding, but I am listening. So I'm not, I didn't escape somewhere. Um, so for a therapist, because any number of therapists will watch this, and I hope that they do, because I want new therapists in this universe of OCD treatment to learn from the greats. So that's why I invite therapists to watch these things. And so, a couple of questions for therapists. You supervise and train therapists across different programs. In your experience, what qualities make a therapist truly effective when working with OCD?
The most effective quality that I've observed in the people that I've trained when I'm looking at when I'm hearing them talk about their cases and what they've done to help alleviate suffering in their patients, the standout quality is always passion for what they do. Like if you really want to treat OCD, you really have to think of it as amazing. It can't just be something that you do for a living. It can't just be like, yeah, I kind of fell into OCD because sort of good at it and whatever. Like you really have to approach it from the angle of this is amazing that we can do this. This is exciting that I can like connect with another person's story and help them turn their lives around and watch them reclaim their lives from OCD. So you have to really be passionate about it. You have to think of yourself as an OCD specialist, and not just a therapist who has had some training in OCD. That, I mean, if we're talking about like what is it that makes somebody stand out, and I'm not saying that a therapist who doesn't specialize in OCD can't be trained in it and can't do an amazing job in it. But your question was like, what really makes a great OCD therapist? I think it's actually really passion. And some people think that it has to include also having lived the experience. And I've certainly known a lot of therapists with lived experience who fit the bill for that. But I know plenty of therapists without lived experience who still just are just in awe of the human spirit when it comes to treating OCD. And so it's not about having it. It's about really being excited about reducing somebody's suffering from OCD. The the other thing I think is really important is get the fundamentals down pat. Like get the basics really under your belt about like the old boring stuff, like learn about habituation, learn about inhibitory learning, figure out, what your strategy is for building a hierarchy and doing that stuff, right? And then be willing to throw most of it away. Be willing to drop everything you're doing in the moment and just be a person and listen, right? Because in cognitive behavioral therapy, it's a very therapist as educator, therapist as coach, patient as student, as learner. And that relationship is very much like that. And that's good, but you have to know when to pivot. You have to know when to stop doing that and just be a person in the room with another person suffering. So sometimes people get so caught up in manualized therapy. They're like, I am doing OCD therapy. OCD is smarter than that. It'll catch you doing that and it'll come up with some way to mess that up. So having the fundamentals down, so you're providing evidence-based care, and then being able to be flexible within those fundamentals to bob and weave with the patient while you're both figuring out together how to beat this thing. That plus passion for what you do, that's what I think makes a great OCD therapist.
I think you answered my next question, so we won't go to that one already. Let me shift to families just so I want to make sure that we get to other questions here based on time. Um, you've also worked closely with families. When loved ones, and you're writing a book about this, when loved ones feel scared, overwhelmed, or unsure how to help, what guidance do you offer to help them support recovery without accommodating compulsions? Right?
Yeah.
What advice do you give them?
So there's the practical advice. So I go over this in my book when a family member has OCD of first, identify your loved one's OCD as the problem, as opposed to your loved one themselves as the problem, right? Identify the OCD as the problem is the first step. And then ask, is there something I can do to help? Like I see that your OCD is hurting you and it's having an impact on me too. And what can I do to help? And in a somewhat perfect world, right? This person's willing to get help, and then you can kind of participate in that by supporting their exposures, and coming up with a contract with a plan of like, I know I've been accommodating a lot of these symptoms because I didn't know what to do, and I love you, and I don't want you to suffer, and so when you say to do this or do that, I'm trying to do it. Now I realize maybe that's strengthening your OCD. I'm gonna start walking that back. How can we collaborate on that? And so if a person is willing to form a contract with their loved one on here's how you'll respond to reassurance seeking questions, and here's how you'll gradually reduce the accommodations you've already provided as opposed to just pulling the rug out from under them. And then the super important thing that happens when someone starts to get better is integrating regular life back into the space that the OCD leaves behind. You don't realize how much of your life can be taken up by OCD. And then when you get better, there's these gaps. Like we used to talk about sports, we used to talk about movies, we used to do these things, and then we stop doing them because all we could talk about is OCD. So when the OCD starts to get better, start filling in that void with resuming your role as parent, as spouse, as adult child, or whatever it is. And that really helps somebody to get better. Um, the other part of it that often gets overlooked is you have to take care of yourself. And sometimes when you're focused on somebody else, so you're the loved one, there's this person who has OCD, you love this person, and you want to help them, but they're on their own journey to some extent, and you can't fix them. You can't solve this problem. And that is very distressing. And so you need to work on yourself. You need to get help. You need to seek support, go to therapy, meditate, exercise. You need to be the strongest version of yourself you can be. For when they're ready, they're going to come to the strong person. When they're getting better, they're going to rely on the strong person. And when they're well, they're going to be able to reconnect with the strong person. But if your sense of self has been reduced to rubble by somebody else's OCD, that's a problem. So I think a lot of people feel like I don't have time to take care of myself. I have to take care of my son with OCD or my wife with OCD. That is part of taking care of them, is making sure you're taking care of their spouse, of their parent, of their loved one, so that that person is there for them when they need them.
That's a great point. And I hadn't even really thought of that, but that's a really good point. Uh, okay, let's talk a little bit about storytelling. You've authored 6 books on OCD treatment. Um, and I believe you said you have one on the way, or I said you had one on the way. Was there one that felt especially personal or meaningful to write? And not that anyone is better than any of the others, but I'm talking about from your own
Yeah.
perspective. Was there one that was especially personal or meaningful? And what message were you most hoping to give readers in that book?
I think each book has its own element of me in it. Um, that feels like, oh, I've been wanting to say this for a long time. So like when a family member has OCD, um, had a lot of personal meaning for me because I was writing it to family members, but I was writing it with the thought in mind that I want a person with OCD to read it and say, okay, fine, you can read this. Right. I wanted them to hand it off to a family member. I didn't want it to be just a book that a family member found in the library and read on their own. I wanted it to be OCD sufferer approved. So I wrote it through the lens of somebody who understands what OCD feels like, but for the person who doesn't have OCD. So I could say, it might seem like this, but actually it's like that. Right. And actually have it be credible. So I put a lot of myself into that book. And then the one that hasn't come out yet that I'm still in the process of writing, called Being a Parent with OCD. I am a parent with OCD, so I put a lot more of myself into that as well. And it's been an interesting uh, journey to write it because it's had me think about a lot of the ways that my OCD has shown up in the process of parenting as well. So sharing some of that, some of which, I talk about like, oh, I had this experience or that experience. Some of it, I don't talk about it from a first person perspective, but I still had that experience and I'm just not really sharing it with the audience. Um, and so it's a more vulnerable book maybe than some of my previous books.
Hmm. Well, they're great. And I encourage everybody who watches this interview, get one or more of John's books. He's a great writer. I mean, that's one thing is you are
Thank you.
an excellent writer. They're easy to read. Um, and just go for it. I remember this is funny. I think it was the Harm OCD book, but Patrick McGrath, Dr. Patrick McGrath, who's a funny guy.
Yeah.
Um, he was doing like a video endorsement of it, and he said, "Harm OCD, Harm OCD." I'll tell you what, Harm OCD. If John Hershfield writes another book, I'm
Yeah.
going after him.
Yeah, Patrick's a great friend and he's hilarious. Actually, it's a true story. He wrote a funny endorsement for another one of my books later, and the publisher like didn't get it. It was like, is this supposed to be some kind of joke? We can't write this. Like they had forgotten that they let him slip by with his endorsement of overcoming harm OCD. Yeah. That was,
That's
by the
funny.
way, you asked before about personal books. That was another one where I just had a lot of patients who just hated themselves so deeply for having harm OCD. And it just felt really, really important to write a book for those people. And the first line of the book is it's going to be okay. Right. And I really wanted there to be a book out there that wasn't just a description of harm OCD, but was a description of like was just like a source of solace for those who are suffering with it. Because often when I meet people with harm OCD, they don't think things are going to be okay at all.
Yeah. And this interview is not about me, but the title of my first book, 2009 was "It'll Be Okay." That
Yeah,
was
that's
the
right. That's
title,
right.
right?
Yeah.
So and that really is an important message for people to hear, right? It's not really reassurance about anything. It's more assurance about the process. That's the way I view it. It's assurance about the process. It's going to be okay, right?
And we talk about reassurance a lot and not giving reassurance. Um, the exception to that rule, in my opinion, is on that subject. You can always give somebody reassurance that there's a path to wellness because I think that that's an objective fact. And however
Right.
dark things are right now, the moment you realize that that darkness is making space for the next light to come in, is that's a turning point.
All right. With all you do as a clinician, educator, author, thought leader, what continues to inspire you to show up for this type of work every day? What inspires you?
Is the individual people that I work with. It's the patients, right? And so it's like it's really not a global thing. I mean, it's easy to say like I love treating OCD, and it feels very, um, there's I saw a meme once. It was like a bunch of circles, meant to be a Venn diagram, but they were separate, and it said um, things I'm good at, things I like to do, things that matter, and things that make money. And the circles weren't touching, right? And it's true for most people. You're very lucky if you get two of those things together, like something you're good at that makes money, but maybe it doesn't matter and you don't like to do it, right? And so for me, I just struck a gold mine finding this. And again, this is my second career. So I was going from being a struggling, occasionally working actor in Los Angeles, where I don't know if I was good at it or not. Sometimes I liked it, sometimes I didn't. I certainly couldn't claim that it was a great way to make money, and I wasn't sure if it mattered. And then I come into this world where I hit all four of those at the same time. So
Mm.
that's great. But to answer your specific question, it's right there in the heart of like it's because last Tuesday one patient said they started doing this thing again that they loved doing, and their OCD told them they weren't allowed to do it, and they're taking it back. It's those moments that they keep me very excited. Of like, it's almost like a healthy addiction. Like, oh, what moment am I going to find in my work this week where someone's going to steal a little bit of their life back from OCD? It's just so rewarding to be a part of that.
Yeah, words could not be truer. All right, one final question before we're going to jump into the Q&A with the audience. For people who may be hesitant to reach out for treatment or support, what words would you offer to help them take that first step?
Um, the most concise way I can put it is you matter. And I'll just leave it at that. You matter. A lot of people think, they're too far gone, they're too sick, they've wasted too much time, they've consumed too many resources, and they start to try to make themselves feel better by putting everybody else above them and reassure themselves by knowing that they put themselves last so they couldn't possibly be a taker or a narcissist or a whiner. And then they forget that they actually matter. They matter to other people, they matter to the universe, and they just matter on their own. So, um, like I said before, hopelessness is not a default setting. It's a symptom. It can be treated, and there's always a path to wellness. You matter.
Okay. So I want to jump into a Q&A, and I am a little bit limited because I, for whatever reason, cannot read if there's anything in the chat room. So what I'm going to ask people to do is raise your hand, and if I see your hand raised, I'm going to unmute your mic, and then go ahead and ask your question. I'll just caution everybody, please be cognizant of everybody else's ability, need, or if they want to ask a question. So try not to spend much time about your own personal history. Just if you have a question, go ahead and ask the question. And I will be the referee. So if I throw a penalty flag, it means I want you to get to your question, so we can get more questions up here. So our first here is for Jamie. I'm going to ask you to unmute, and then you can go ahead and ask your question. Go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you guys for doing this. And yeah, I've just read one of your books, John, and it was great. I'm trying to do mindfulness and meditation and all that. But my question is, so I get confused when we say like, okay, you realize that you have this, or your mind's gonna drift off. So you see that and then you drop it. That makes total sense to me. But then at other times I read about, no, you need to sit in it, like
Mm.
sit in the distress. So I get confused about that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it really shows that you're paying attention, because the language can be very confusing around these things. What does it mean to sit with discomfort versus dropping it and letting it go?
Yeah.
Um, and I think one way to think about it is when we say something like sit with the discomfort, we don't mean dwell on the thoughts. I mean, there's certainly exposure protocols where you're purposefully focusing on a thought for the purpose of habituation. But in your day-to-day life, a thought comes up. Is it useful? No, it's a thought about me turning my car into oncoming traffic. Not useful, right? So, okay. So then I'm going to drop that thought and go back to what I was doing before I got distracted, right? You're treating the thought like a distraction. When you do that, you're going to feel a little bit uncomfortable, maybe a little bit guilty. Maybe that was an important thought. Maybe I should have paid more attention to it. That feeling of unease in your body is not the thing that you want to be running away from. That's the thing that you want to make space for. So it's not the thought itself that you want to keep coming back to and analyzing and figuring out. It's the exhaust that the thought leaves behind when you drop it. And when we say sitting with it, we don't mean really, having it sit on your head and be the most important thing in your space. It really means you're in a movie theater watching a movie and there's somebody that you don't like crunching loudly on their popcorn and they're sitting next to you and you are sitting with them. And so it's allowing that to be there while you also, in this metaphor, continue to drive, listen to your music. If it's a really predominant feeling like of like intense emotion, okay, yeah, that might not be a bad idea to take a moment to observe where it is in the body and put some intention behind making space for it and allowing it and recognizing like, okay, I can tolerate this feeling. But the shorter version of the answer to your question is, sitting with discomfort doesn't mean focusing on the cause of the discomfort. It means making space for the fact that something is present and you're going to allow it to be present.
All
Okay.
right, Jamie, does that answer your question?
It does. I wish somebody would write that down in one of your books. That would be great.
I'll
Hey,
I'll
by the
squeeze
way,
it.
John,
I'll squeeze it into the next one. I promise.
oh, yeah,
There's
or
still a
you just
chance.
put an end note to this. By the way, here's another point.
Yeah,
When, when do you expect the next book to come out?
I think it comes out in January, about a year from now. These things are
Okay.
kind of a slow burn, and I'm rounding the last lap on the manuscript, and then it goes through a very long, complicated, micro editing process and advertising and the rest of it. So it either comes out at the end of this year or the beginning of 2027.
Okay. All right. Well, we will keep our eye out. Does anybody else have a question for John? Yep, I see one here. This is Rose. Let me unmute you, Rose. Go ahead. There you go. You're up.
I read your book about like the everyday mindfulness for OCD, and I had like a question about self-compassion and mindfulness when doing ERP. Like for example, if you like have a thought and you tell yourself that you don't want to like engage in it, would it be compulsive if I tell myself like I don't want to think about it and like stay in the present? Like when could this become like a compulsive thing I could do?
Yeah, I don't think that's compulsive because you're just stating a fact. I mean, if you have to repeat that fact by rote, in prime numbers or something like that, it can become compulsive. Like if there's a specific way you have to do it in order to feel okay, that's what I would be skeptical of. But if you're just acknowledging that there's this itch and it's like trying to get you to engage with the thought and you're telling yourself, yeah, I just don't really want to do that right now. That doesn't serve me right now. What I want to do is play this video game, and I'm going to keep coming back to that game. And then your OCD pulls you away and say, "Yeah, but have you thought about this?" And I say, "No, I just really don't want to have this conversation right now." You would do that with like an annoying person, right? Who like kept trying to pull your attention away and say, "Hey, can we talk about this?" And you say, "No, I don't want to talk about this. I'm not going to do it." And maybe you have to do that repeatedly, but as long as the repetition itself isn't ritualistic, I wouldn't think of it as a compulsion. I would think of it as like a way of treating yourself with compassion. You're saying like, I want something and I'm going to take it. And you're just reminding yourself of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question.
One of the things I love about you, John, is that you never do that to people at the IOCDF conference. No, 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 no.
That's right.
Oh, there's Shannon. No, but let me run the other way. So, all right. I don't see any other questions. Anybody have one? I have one final one for John, and then we can get everybody off to the NFL playoff games today. Sorry that Baltimore didn't make it, John, but whatever.
I'm more of a baseball guy, and I'm so used to having my heart just crushed by the Orioles that I don't get too excited about it anymore.
Camden Yards is a wonder. I love that
I love
ballpark.
going to games. It's so much fun. Yeah.
I got a son up in that area, so we've been to. He and I go to Camden Yards. All right, my final question for you. It's really about taking people into the future in their own recovery. But if you could leave our audience with one compassionate takeaway about recovery, humanity, and hope, what would it be?
Well, I touched on this a little bit before, with the concept of you matter, and I think I could build on that to say, your story isn't finished, right? Every moment that you're alive, there's another page after that. Their story is still unfolding. And I think people sometimes forget to look at themselves from the perspective of wellness, right? So fast forward to the point when you're well and you're looking back on this person who's struggling right now. What do you have to say to them? Right? You can be like, "What's wrong with you? Stop being sick." No, you're gonna have some compassion for them. You're gonna tell them like, "Hey, I know you're hurting. Don't forget, there's another version of you waiting to be revealed. Don't give up. Keep at it. And don't be ashamed to ask for help. Pull in all the resources that you have." Um, so yeah, so I would say try to remember the story is not it's not over. It's still being written. This is just the part. This is a chapter in your memoir, and it could be a really important, pivotal chapter. And then that the next chapter will be like, "Phew, that was rugged,"
Yeah.
and then on to the next thing.
But I'm writing the next chapter, right? So that's
Exactly.
awesome.
Yeah.
All right. John, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I consider you a friend and I've known you for quite a while. And I'm so impressed with everything that you've done and your passion, which you talked about, but your devotion to helping people get better. Um, you and I both know how debilitating this disorder can be and how it can really adversely impact one's life and the lives of people around you. So your again devotion to helping people make it through this journey into where freedom and recovery and clarity all are the norm instead of the exception. I just applaud you. I really appreciate everything you do. With that, let me just say goodbye to everybody. Thank you for being here. This recording will be available on my YouTube channel. John, I'll make sure that you have a copy for your records. And I just appreciate everybody being here. So, John, I'll give you the final, 10 seconds, and then we'll be out.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Shannon. This was great, and I really appreciate everything you're doing for the OCD community. We're all in this together, so thanks a lot.
All right, everybody have a great Sunday, and we are out here.